I was speaking of faction yesterday, and I wanted to get into a little deeper conversation with this. And one of my favorite people to have deeper conversations with is Neil McCabe, a conservative commentator and editor of the Guns and Patriots newsletter, gunsandpatriots.com. Neil, welcome back to the program.
Hey, great to be with you, Tom.
I co-authored this book, The American Revolution of 1800, with Dan Sisson, that just came out, and we were doing a book signing here in D.C. on Sunday, and we've been talking about it on the air, and one of the big things that the revolution, I mean the election of President Jefferson, and the repudiation of the John Adams presidency was a slap in the face to faction, and in Federalist Number 10.
Madison.
James Madison, thank you very much. November 22nd, 1787. Defined faction, and then went on to say, this is the thing that can bring down a democracy. And he said, by faction, I understand a number of citizens, whether it's a majority or a minority, who are united and actuated by some common impulse of passion, interest, adverse to the rights of other citizens or to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community. So Madison's filter for whether something was faction or not was whether it worked to the benefit of the community as a whole or whether it worked against the community as a whole, but to the benefit of the members of the faction, whether they were a minority or a majority. Using that definition, which there was no debate about for at least the first 50 years of this republic, using that definition, it seems to me, Neil, that virtually all of the groups on the right are factions because they're, tax cuts for billionaires. That works for billionaires, but not for me. More gun laws or fewer gun laws, more guns. That works well for gun manufacturers, but, you have more people dying accidentally. The people who think that there should be no Food and Drug Administration or no EPA. Well, that works well for the Koch brothers and for the food processing companies, but, people are going to die as a result of it. On the other hand, it seems like all of or most of the groups on the left, trying to save the climate, right? For example, that's very much the common good. Nobody's making a buck off that, are not factions. And I was just wondering if you thought I was right or wrong.
Well, Tom, I think I would caution you to think that all of this environmental stuff or climate change or when I was growing up, we called it global warming. And when I was really growing up, we called it the new ice age. There's tons of people who are making billions of dollars off of green energy and biofuels. And, the list of companies that Obama gave billions of dollars to that then went bankrupt because they were working on batteries or wind farms. So there's certainly some kind of environmental elite that's made a ton of money off of scaring the bejeebus out of people.
Well, I would argue that when Elon Musk went to Texas or Arizona or wherever he decided to build his battery factory and said, give me hundreds of millions of dollars in tax abatements and I will build a factory here and put some jobs in your town, that behavior was factional behavior. That
was corporate welfare.
Yeah, exactly. I don't disagree with that. But in the aggregate, what I'm saying is, can you point to me any quote conservative or Republican groups? It seems to me that the Americans for Prosperity, the Koch brothers group, look at all the things that they support. Are any of those not just nakedly faction?
Well, yeah, in a way, they're anti-faction, Tom, because what the Koch brothers are trying to do, and other sort of the more libertarian groups, sort of like Cato, which is heavily supported by
which used to be the Charles Koch Foundation, right?
Sure. What they're trying to do is make the government smaller and less active picking winners and losers. I think, when people talk about why are there so many lobbyists in Washington, D.C., the reason why there are so many lobbyists in Washington, D.C. is because that's where the money is and that's where the decisions are made.
Well, and that's faction. That's those lobbyists are promoting their own self-interests in a way that's adverse to the public interest, to paraphrase Madison. And I don't disagree on that. But that said, name the vast majority of the lobbyists in this town, at least that I'm aware of, are representing the defense industry, They're representing the tobacco industry. They're representing the oil industry. They're representing the big power industries and not looking for green subsidies. I mean, they'll take what they can get, but mostly they want to defend the $50 trillion worth of fossil fuels they've got in the ground.
Well, I think, going back to my point, what the Koch brothers are trying to do is by making the federal government less active picking winners and losers in the marketplace, that's sort of freeing up people and dissolving this fraction. It's the picking of winners and losers that bothers people. And we need to get that. And when you bring all of these decisions and the money being spent back to the states and the local government, then the people, that general populace, it's a lot easier to go to the State House than it is to go to the Capitol with your tractor.
But the people, but Neil, what you're saying is that if we, the government is we the people, right? The government should be protecting the public interest and operating in a way that works to the public interest. When it doesn't, the government itself becomes faction, as Madison pointed out. And so if you're saying shrink the size of government, you're saying shrink the size of government for this one very specific purpose, which is having government not pick winners and losers. I think the government should be picking winners and losers. I do not want, the oil companies to be the winners when that's going to mean the death of future generations of humans.
Well, a lot of people like oil. A lot of people like gas. I mean, that's
the ones who make money off it, yeah.
No, there's a lot of people driving around your building right now looking for a parking space who like gasoline and they wish it was cheaper.
I think they like transportation, and if they could do it with electricity just as easily as with gas and for the same cost, they would do it in a heartbeat. And if we were to put a carbon tax on the 1,300 companies and individuals who are basically the producers of more than 95% of all the carbon in the United States, and then rebate 100% of that tax to consumers, people in rural areas who drive a lot, for example, they would end up ahead of the game. They would get more money than the increase in gas costs.
And what you're doing then is you're picking one group of winners and you're picking a group of losers.
Which is the role of government.
Well,
you're saying that shouldn't be the role of government. I'm saying that's absolutely why we elect representatives, is to protect us from the bad guys and promote good public policy.
Unless I support my family as a coal miner, unless I support my family.
If you support your family as a coal miner and Elon Musk builds a battery factory in your backyard where you can now have the same job, only you're making green things or you're making windmills or installing solar panels, how's that a bad thing?
Well, I don't know if Elon Musk is spending much time in these deserted communities in coal country in Kentucky or Virginia or Ohio. Or
well, then we should have government step in, shouldn't we? Isn't this time for a TVA?
The Obama
a solar TVA
against these communities, and so maybe in a generation or two something will happen. But basically,
the Obama administration is not against these communities.
He's throwing away a generation, hoping that something will come up instead.
So we should keep the buggy whip makers.
Well, no, absolutely not.
Well, that's what the coal industry is. They're the buggy whip makers. I mean, right now, relative to fracked gas.
It may go out on its own, but it should go out on its own. It doesn't need to be pushed.
Okay.
And it's certainly one of the advantages of the American economy is the cheap electricity provided by coal.
Or solar. Neil,
this is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Neil McCabe, gunsandpatriots.com is the website. Neil, it's always nice talking with you. Thanks for dropping by today.
Bye-bye.